Good evening, everyone. We continue from where we left off yesterday at the end of First Samuel chapter 23. Um, we found that Saul was about to encircle David, and then he got distracted and called away because the Philistines were coming to raid the land of Israel. And so, midway through attempting to capture David, Saul had to leave. Now, in chapter 24, verse 1, uh, we need to realize that actually there was actually one more verse, chapter 23, verse 29, actually, which was left out. Uh, we found that after Saul left to deal with the Philistines, David left for En Gedi. So I just want to point out to you, this was where it was left off in First Samuel 23:29. David left for En Gedi. Now, En Gedi is actually a place where it's got a rocky hill slopes. They've got lots of caves there that they can hide. And that became another stronghold that David was now hiding after leaving the previous place, which was at Maon. When we take on the narrative from chapter 24, we read of Saul coming back from pursuing the Philistines, and Saul was successful in chasing the Philistines away. Then he was told, you can notice the narrative shows a lot of battle intelligence moving back and forth. Uh, and somehow Saul knew, and he says that David, behold, David is in the wilderness of En Gedi. Now, En Gedi uh, is like the fountain. Aim is a fountain, and you find the word Gedi is a male goat, a small male goat. So you get the 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 definition of Engedi, the meaning being the fount of the kid, the goat kid, right? A baby goat. And that is where David is right now. Now, this place is somewhere in the middle of, towards the middle of the Dead Sea, on the western shore of the Dead Sea. And in those days, you find that the Dead Sea wasn't as salty as it is now. And that's a place where there's a rocky hill formation and lots of, I suppose you call them caves, places to hide. And that's why it's called a stronghold. In chapter 24, verse 2, it says Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel. Now, this whole idea uh, is that, interestingly, Saul knows how many men is with David, but he chose to have an overkill of 3,000 men. Now, chosen men means selected men who are battle hardened and knows how to do this job, right? Just take that as an approach of Saul, that he is not going to let this slip away from him. And he went to seek David. The idea of seek David is to look to find him, right? Look to find him, look to arrest him, look to capture him and his men, 600 of them, in front of the rocks of the wild goat. Now, this rock of the wild goat, as we can see that you can think of it this way. En Gedi is a fairly big place, and in one of those big, well, they call it rocks, but actually they are all hill slopes, single piece hill slopes, and all rocky mountains basically. And because it's called Engedi, the kid meaning goat, a baby goat, there are names that's given to rocks there called rocks of the wild goat. In this case, wild goats, right? Mountain goats. Uh, those goats who are climbing. And it appears that these would be the higher slopes of Engedi. He came to the sheepfolds on the way where there was a cave. Now, this idea of a cave is a hole in a mountain, and Saul went in there to relieve himself. Um, Now, this idea of relieve himself is actually read from how should we say it? It's a very soft Hebrew term that means to cover himself. Right? This relief here, it talks about to cover himself. It's a very soft word, but it really means defecate. And so cover is a euphemism. Euphemism. Now, what's a euphemism? When there are, well, I won't call it rude words, but hard words, where it sounds a bit crude and awkward in the language, although they do use it, but in more polite situations, they would replace this idea of to defecate with the idea of to cover himself. Now, David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. Now, this word here means the back part, right? The back part. Now, obviously, the cave is fairly large. So, inner recesses is really the back part of the cave. Verse 4, the men of David said to him, there are lots of advice that's going to be given. Look, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. Now, what does this mean? This is a phrase that is given by the people around David because it's too good to be true. And it is a time where the element of surprise is with David, and Saul is there all by himself, thinking that he is all by himself, and he is obviously not guarded. And David and his men were all there, right there. And so the men said, this is just too good to be true. And they ascribe this, they ascribe it to God. It says, this is the day of which the Lord said to you. It's ascribed to God. Now, did God say this? No, God didn't say that. But that is how the Hebrew people talk. When certain things are flowing a certain way, they would ascribe such elements to God, good and bad, right? Good and bad. And in this case, it's good in the eyes of the men, thinking of David, that it's just too good to be true. What a coincidence that Saul has to come in and do his business all alone, unprotected, with David and his 600 men there. So it must be a big group of them. But they were hiding. And so David was encouraged to go and do to him as it seems good to you. Now, what does it mean, good to you? Uh, the idea here is good to your eyes. If David sees this as good, then do what you want. Who is the enemy? Saul, in this case. And then David arose, he cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. Now, what does this mean? Now, the idea here is to cut off, and literally, uh, it is to cut off a part, right? Cut a part. Which part? It says here the edge of Saul's robe. The the Hebrew reads as the wings, right? The wing of his coat, which means that as Saul is, well, I suppose he's squatting down, doing his business, David would have come behind him in his, I suppose, preoccupied situation. And Saul was not aware that the tip of his coat was actually cut off. Now, secretly is correct. It was done, how should you say, it was done to Saul in a way uh, where Saul was not aware, in secret, uh, where Saul wasn't aware. Right? That would be a good way of understanding it. Verse 5, it came about afterward that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. Let's look at this. After David cut off that part, the word conscience, as you will know, that there is no such word in Hebrew called conscience. The word here is heart. And so this is the mind of David, right? The mind of David. The mind of David was struck, or what you would call, I guess you can say, caused to be struck. This what bothered him is caused to be struck. Now, obviously, in the modern day expression of the English, it is possible to translate it and say, yes, David's conscience seared him. It pricked his conscience. But in the Hebrew, there is no such conscience being seared. It really means the heart, which is the mind of David. And the mind of David was caused, he caused himself to be struck. And the word struck is a very common word, uh, basically to say that it is to to it was attacked, right? Uh, I guess you could say it was attacked or wounded, right? Attacked or wounded. So as you can see, the Hebrew word is actually very vivid. The mind of David was disturbed. It was going back and forth, striking at himself. You can say his thoughts weren't there. And it really bothered him. So this word conscience bothered him literally means the mind or the heart of David was caused to be struck by himself. And what was striking him was the situation that bothered him was that he actually cut off the wing of Saul, right? It's called the wing of Saul. It's a very interesting expression. The edge of Saul. So the word robe does not appear in the Hebrew, but we can assume that it's the robe of Saul because it is the edge is the wing. of Saul. And it would be the extremities of his garment, right? The extremity of his garment. Verse 6 says, so he said to his men, this is David's reply. David's reply. David says, far be from me, far be it from me. Now, this word, far be it from me, literally means God forbid. It also means something, let it not be. Let it not be. It says, because of the Lord that I should do this thing to my Lord. Who is my Lord? This is Saul. Because of God that I should do this thing to my Lord. And who is he in the eyes of God? The Lord's anointed. To stretch out my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed. This is a very important expression. What do you mean, the Lord's anointed? He is the Mashiach. Mashiach of God. And this word has been repeated itself. So in the eyes of David, in the eyes of David, Saul is God's Mashiach, his anointed. That's designated for a particular role, in this case as the king of Israel. So Saul is a Mashiach, if you want to call it in the English equivalent, that Saul is a Messiah of Israel, because God has anointed him. So anyone that is anointed is a Mashiach. And so you find that in Isaiah, you find Cyrus as the Mashiach, you find the priest as the Mashiach. So the Messiah comes in various forms and categories. And in this particular one would be specifically one who has been anointed. And yes, Samuel anointed Saul. So we must be very mindful of that. Although God says, I do not want you to be king, God did not take his life. God spared him and allowed him to continue to be king. And of course, now we are reading this narrative of these few chapters that Saul is bent on killing David. And while David had the chance to strike at Saul, he didn't. He didn't. Because in God's eyes, Saul is the Mashiach. And so in David's eyes, Saul is also the Mashiach. So what do we see here? Man after God's heart, isn't it? David, time and time again, demonstrates that he will act only as God sees fit. And striking Saul is not God's intent, especially when God has anointed Saul. And so Saul has a special place in the eyes of God, even when God is displeased with him and has nothing to do with him and would not allow consultation with him anymore. Now, David persuaded his men. Now, the idea of persuading literally means try to, how should we say? Shasa would be to tear to pieces, right? Although it says persuaded, this word actually means to tear to pieces. Now, what does that mean? It means that David is actually trying to take these words of the man to go and do as he sees fit, that God has given him this opportunity. And David is now counter arguing that this is not the case. This is not how God would see things. And thereby, the English translators use the word persuaded. It's really to cause the men to be dissuaded from their intent and did not allow them to rise against Saul, that this is not God's intent. And then Saul arose and left the cave and went on his way. They were all discussing at the back of the cave, as you can tell. And so this actual opportunity was lost in the eyes of the men, because David says this cannot be. God forbid. Let it not be. David will not do such a thing. He is a man after God's heart, because Saul is the Mashiach of God. Verse 8, and now after Saul left, David arose, went out of the cave, and called after Saul. Now, what did he do? He called him, literally shouted at Saul. And what did David say? My Lord, the King. Notice, this is total respect for God's anointed. Again, this word anointed, the Mashiach. And then Saul looked behind him. Now notice all these actions. David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. So you find that this is Saul, and then you have David, this is to prostrate, face to the ground. So David, Saul. Now understand, this is a very oriental expression, right? So he actually, well, this whole idea here is he shriveled up, right? He shriveled up, nose to the soil, and prostrated himself. There are three actions all in this: bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. He shriveled himself up on the ground, and his nose is to the soil, and he prostrated himself. This is a very oriental expression. What expression is this? The lesser power is humbled before the one in power. So the power is in front of him, who is Saul, the king, right? He is an Elohim. Think of it that way. He has the ability to take the life of David. And David remembers he is Adoni Hamelech, my Lord, the King. And Saul recognized him, and David immediately bowed. This is a situation where we have to be very mindful that David knows his place and is playing his role correctly, not going against the king, because that would be treasonous. That is something that we all need to bear in mind. Anyone who goes after the king is treason. That's death penalty, basically. You cannot kill the king. And if you kill the king, then you will be held liable, and then David cannot be king. So David is very mindful and understanding that in the eyes of God, that is not the right thing to do. So David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, 'Behold, David seeks to harm you'?" So he says, why do you hear words of men, people whispering into his ears, saying that David seeks? Now, the word seek here is to seek to find, right? And the word harm literally means ra'ah, evil. Remember what we said about evil? Evil is in the eyes of the beholder. It's not a moral thing, right? It doesn't have to be. So in the eyes of the beholder, it would be against Saul, right? Saul would be looking at it and this is evil because David seeks to do something against him, which in Saul's eyes is not acceptable. That is what it means. And that is how Saul is seeing David. Verse 10, behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord has given you today into my hand in the cave, and someone said to kill you, but had pity on you. Now, what does this mean? Now, this word here, we have to be very careful. And there's a little bit of trick in the Hebrew language. It says, your eyes have seen, that it is to tell Saul, you can witness this, right? Your eyes, you are literally seeing this, that although God has given you into my hand in the cave, and someone said, now notice someone said would be the men, right? The men said to kill you. But in this case, it is not my eye. The word had pity actually refers to my nefesh. My nefesh had pity. The word pity is compassion. To spare. So my nefesh spared you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's Mashiach. So that you can see this. My nefesh had pity on you is an A. And I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord would be a B. It's the same thing. It says, my nefesh and I will not kill you. And that is what compassion and to spare means. That David would not strike at my Lord because you are God's anointed. This is what verse 10 actually means. Verse 11. Now, my father, David addresses Saul as my father. Understand that Saul is Jonathan's father, and the closeness between David and Jonathan is one of a father and son. He says, see the wings, see the wings, the wing of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the wing of your robe, I did not kill you. So Now you need to know and perceive. Now understand this. Know and perceive is an A and a B. It's saying the same thing twice. That there is no evil or rebellion in my hands. What was David saying? There was no Ra'ah, there is no Pesha in my hands. I did not do any of this. I had not done anything that you deem evil. I did not fight against you. In fact, I have not sinned. And this is khatat against you. I did not know offense. Right? This word is an offense, right? I did no offense against you, although you are waiting so that my soul to take it. And so this word here is nephesh. So in context, what had pity? David's nephesh. And David's nephesh did not take the life of Saul. Verse 12. It says, may God judge between you and me, and may God avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. This is absolutely noble, right? May Saul strike David, but not, right? But not David strike Saul. So you could see this is a very interesting expression. Saul is older than David. There is a respect for the elderly, to honor the elderly, and in this case, as a father, so honor your father and mother. In this case, Saul is the king. Saul is the anointed or the Mashiach. And so David is here stating that he is absolutely honorable. So honorable and innocent of any crime. And God can judge this. Right? That's all it says. God can judge this. Now we say that the proverb of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness. This interesting say the out of the wickedness comes forth wickedness. I would refer you to Exodus chapter 21, verse 13. That the wicked shall be delivered into the hands of God to be judged. But my hand shall not be against you, because David is not the judge. It is the Lord who will be the judge. My hand cannot strike you, because my hand cannot be against you, because the punishment must come from God and not from David. Verse 14. These are questions for Saul. He says, who are you chasing? Who do you come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a single flea? All these are, a very, very pertinent points to highlight to Saul that he is wrong. The Lord therefore be judge and decide between you and me. And may God see and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. The idea of plead my cause is that God will see and God will intervene, and God will, and this word deliver me from your hand literally means will vindicate. Right? Vindicate. Now, what does vindicate actually mean? Vindicate me means prove innocence, right? Prove innocence. That there is no cause for Saul to kill David. When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, then Saul said this, is this your voice, my son David? Notice father and son speaking as if, and you look at this, father and son is not necessarily a blood relationship of a father giving birth to a son, but in this way that Saul is much older than David, and so the older one calls the younger son. Is this are these your words, right? Are these your words? So it doesn't say is this your voice, right? Um, it says is these your words, not voice, my son. Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. This word voice is sound, which is correct. The first one is not voice. And so this is wrong, right? This is not voice, this is words. And is this your position, basically? And if that's your position, Saul is now pricked to his conscience and he felt really bad about this. Verse 17, he said to David, you know what? You are more righteous than I. The word righteous here is just. You're more just than I. Is Saul just? Saul tries to do what is right. But David has done much better than Saul. That's what it means. This is a comparison. For you have dealt well with me. You have dealt well means that you deal fully. You have recompense. You have rewarded good. This word well is tov. It means good. You have given me good. While I have, this is the same word. While I have, let's see. While I have rewarded, same word, right? Recompense, rewarded you with evil. This is the word evil. Ra'ah. So what is evil to David? Evil, it would be something disagreeable to David, and Saul chasing David to kill him is wicked, right? It's evil in the eyes of David. So understand this idea here of good, tov, versus wicked, evil. You notice the Hebrew is always contrasting good and evil, and it doesn't have a moral aspect. It is always from the eyes of the one looking at the situation. When it is going well for the person looking at it, then it's good. When it's not going well and that's what you don't want to happen, that's evil. That is what it says here. And Saul says, you are better than me. You are more just than me. When you deal with me, when I'm chasing you, you still dealt good to me, that you spared my life. But I have dealt evil with you because I am chasing you down to kill you. You have declared today that you have done tov, good, right, to me. That the Lord delivered me into your hand. What does that mean? It means that there is a chance to kill Saul. It's a situation where you can't deny that is a beautiful chance to do it, but you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? Safely means send him in a way, in a good way, a way that is good, tov. If there's an enemy, you would actually deal with him in a way where you would eliminate your enemy, but you didn't. So may the Lord reward you with good in return for what you have done to me today. Now, this word here is um, that God will reward what is tov. And so, since you gave me tov, may God give you tov as well. That would be Saul blessing David. And he is very, very, I would say, grateful, very grateful to David for not killing him when he had the chance. Verse 20. Now look, I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. Now, this is something that we need to break down. It says, look, I know. Remember, know has to be learned. So he has learned, he has perceived, he has found out, right? I'm giving you the whole list. He recognized. All of these are good replacement words. He admits. He now has the knowledge and he admit. So admitted. And, and basically it's know by experience. So through it all, it finally confirms in his mind, yes, I know. I know you will definitely be king. And that the kingdom of Israel will be in your hand. Be established means will take position. That one day David will definitely be king. This is an admission. This is a recognition. This is by learning. So this word know is really multifaceted, very multifaceted. Verse 21. Now swear to me by the Lord. Saul recognizes God, and Saul recognizes the formal oath. And once you swear by the Lord, you cannot break it. And so, what did Saul want David to promise? That you will not cut off my descendants after me. Do not cut off the name of Saul's family. That is very important, that Saul's family will remain intact, that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. So you notice this right here is an A and a B. Do not cut off my descendants after me is the same as do not destroy my name from my father's household. Retain the name and honor of Saul. This is the promise that Saul wanted David to make. So when he says swear by the Lord means when David becomes king, he will have to honor what he has promised. And so David swore to Saul, and the end of this chapter's narrative is peace between the two. Saul went to his home, David went up to the stronghold En Gedi, right? He's there hiding. They parted ways in, I would say, in fairly good terms. There is no evil spirit upon Saul. He didn't go crazy. And he's now very grateful that David had actually spared his life. And by seeing all that has happened, Saul knows that David is truly one of kingship. And with this, we come to the end of our session today. Saul was diverted. Philistines invaded the land. Do you think God has a hand in it, a way to protect David? Possibly. Possibly. It's not stated in the text. It's not stated in the text. No, some people say it's a coincidence. But I guess since it's in this text, I would tend to agree that behind this, the silent hand of God had come to give David a chance to run away. I think so, because God has said that he will not give David into the hands of Saul. And it's very near already, almost getting David, and yet he couldn't. And yes, I tend to agree that that might be the case. And with this, we will end here, although there's one more verse that's in the next chapter, but it's okay. We will continue tomorrow.